Today on Toasting the Classics, we're getting in our time machines and visiting the heady days of swinging London. No, we're not doing Austin Powers, though that's an idea. We're talking about the first and arguably greatest of the rock operas, The Who's Tommy. Wait, are there other rock operas? I'm not sure how I feel about that possibility. But Tommy, the brainchild of Droopy Dog himself, Pete Townsend, was The Who's Hail Mary to save the band. The record brought them back to relevance, made enough money to support Keith Moon's habits, and killed at Woodstock. But beyond the classic rock mainstay Pinball Wizard, does Tommy hold up today? Mix yourself a Tom Collins and join us as we find out. It's time for episode 101 of Toasting the Classics, Tommy. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, a podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we drink something inspired by the classic while we talk about it. And we're going to decide if this thing deserves to be a classic. I don't know about you, Clint. By the way, my name's Dave McArthur, and I got with me the original,
this is Clint Lanier, yeah.
Clint Lanier. And I don't know about you, but I had no history with this at all whatsoever. I knew this was a thing. I've heard the song Pinball Wizard on the classic rock radio a few times. But otherwise, I have no interaction with not only the album Tommy, which is what we chose for this week, by The Who, 1969, but I also don't have any history with The Who. I mean, I've never listened to a Who album at all, ever.
You've heard many of their songs.
I've heard many of their songs.
So
I went
prolific,
through, I went through some of their catalog, and I was like, oh yeah, like Baba O'Reilly. I was like, I know that song, but which song is it? And I listened to it. Okay, that song, right? Yeah, I definitely know that. And I know My Generation, maybe like 10 songs that get good classic rock play. And for some reason, when I was working at the video store I was telling you about before, because I was watching just everything, I watched Quadrophenia, the film. That's the only interaction with The Who I've ever had, was watching that crazy movie. It must have been about 1980, 1979. So it's like really young Sting shows up in that movie. He must have been in The Police already, but I'm not really 100% sure. But
so my only interaction, well, I mean, obviously I know a lot of the bangers, but, and I like them, and I like Daltrey. Townsend's a bit. We'll get back to that, but I like Daltrey quite a bit.
Oh, interesting. You don't like...
Well, man, the pretense just oozes from Townsend.
Yes.
You know, quite taken with himself. And
I always forget. I'm Googling images of what does the band look like, and I always forget. I've never in my life seen a face like Pete Townsend's face, except on Pete Townsend. His nose starts from where my forehead is and goes down to like where my
he looks like Mopey Dog. He looks like Mopey Dog.
He looks like a cartoon character, definitely. I've never seen a Droopy Dog.
Droopy Dog. Yeah, that's what it was. Right. Droopy Dog. Yeah. He's Mr. Droopy Dog. He's got these bags under his eyes, but the bags under my eyes are where bags should be. The bags under his eyes are like in the middle of my cheek.
Nice.
Nice. So
those like saddlebags on a horse.
Yeah. But he's an artiste. He's not an artist. He's an artiste. He's one of those people. But anyway, but I've always, you look
at Roger Daltrey and you say to yourself, oh, that looks like that could be the lead man in a British band. He's handsome, right. Like whatever. He looks like he says, but then you look at Pete Townsend and you're like, that guy must be a brilliant artist, because people let him be on stage.
When you hear them talk, like Daltrey's just full of energy and full of life. I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. But go watch an interview of Daltrey and then watch an interview of Townsend, and you will totally see the difference. Like, I would have many beers with Daltrey, and we would have a good time. I couldn't do that with Townsend. Like, I'd be like,
oh, I'll take that challenge. I'll go Pete Townsend. That sounds
well.
Like
I'd be like, I'm going to get up and go to the loo, which is what he would call it, and then I just probably wouldn't come back.
I think I could stand to have a beer with Morrissey, so I'm a little more open minded to these kind of I would suffer through talking. Well,
as long as no animals died in the making of that beer, I think you'd be okay. I know a lot of their hits. I've always enjoyed their hits. I've watched their stage shows. So I've watched live performances of them before, just off YouTube and stuff. Okay. And they were like the live band to watch. I mean, they were ahead of their time and total excess. And everything anybody else has done, like there's Nirvana turning up the stage and stuff. I mean, The Who did that in the 60s regularly. I remember in high school, I had this friend who thought himself a bit of a highbrow kind of connoisseur of music and this kind of stuff. And he's like, dude, I've got a copy of Tommy, a VCR or VHS. He's like, I've got a copy of Tommy.
The video.
And I was like, well, what's Tommy? He's like, it's a rock opera. And I'm like, He's like, oh, you got to watch it. You got to watch it. Okay.
So look at the impression you just did. of the look on your own face.
Yeah, pretty much. Well,
That's
and
exactly my response to the term rock opera. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't think I'm interested. Thank you,
right.
thank you.
And it wasn't the movie though. That was the thing. It wasn't the movie with like,
I
Elton
thought you were talking
John.
about the.
No,
Okay,
there's an actual like
yeah,
in an operatic theater, and it was a recording of the opera, Tommy, like it,
huh?
and I was like, I put it in, and I swear, like 5 minutes, I'm like into it. I'm like, what the heck is it? What is this? And they say they list when it was made. It was like 84 or something like that. I think he recorded it like off of PBS or something stupid. Oh, it was terrible. I've never gone back to it, and I know Pinball Wizard's a great song,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but every time I hear it, I think of that stupid experience, and I think of how terrible that was.
yeah.
But I had never heard the album. All this to
Uh-huh.
say, I never heard the album all the way through. Took it, open minded as I could. Read the
Because
history. Good.
definitely. I made a little note at one point. I was like, this. I listened to the album, and like you said, I was trying to have an open mind because rock opera, the phrase, has always given me a little bit of queasiness just hearing that. I'm like, I
A little
don't
bit of
know if I'm,
pause. Yeah.
and I accepted it as it was, but about three-quarters of the way through, I was like, boy, if you decided you didn't like this before you started listening to it,
Uh-huh.
you could really hate this. Like this could really this is something you
Yeah.
got to go into thinking, oh wow, this is a completely new experience. I never heard of anything like this. I
Yeah.
try to put myself in the 1969 mentality, and
Right.
also where it is for the Who, right? Because we've talked about a couple of these bands, Sergeant Pepper's for the Beatles or
Hmm.
Pet Sounds for the Beach Boys, and
Hmm.
how these albums, these great albums, are like such a departure from what the band had been doing before. And I
Right.
guess Radiohead also, right, to some extent.
Yes.
But this one was, the Who is like this one thing, sort of a proto punk rock band going on TV and smashing their guitars and, smashing their drums and things like that. And then a couple
Hmm.
years later, they come out with this, and it's really a very different thing if you were a fan
Yeah.
of the Who, I imagine. Like, wouldn't be anything like what you were expecting. Suddenly,
Right.
they seem more like Queen, I think,
Yes.
when you
Well,
listen to this.
I think they predated that, but I mean,
Oh yeah, they're definitely before Queen. I mean, but
but
this album is like
mhm.
something Queen did before Queen. I mean,
Yes.
definitely like
Well, it was, I guess it was their version of, I mean, you mentioned Sergeant Pepper's. I mean, I guess it was their
Mhm.
version of. So let's set it all up because we haven't set any of this up yet. Got the band The
Right.
Who, they're formed in like 1964 or 65,
What
thereabouts,
I had, yeah,
right?
64, yeah.
And they were very prolific. They were kind of at first they were part of the mod movement, which is this whole movement, and everybody was. The Rolling Stones were, the Beatles were kind of at the forefront of it. But like, think of everybody that in the mod movement, the guys especially, they all had the early Beatles haircut. They drove for some stupid reason. They all drove scooters with a
Hooters.
bunch of
Yeah.
mirrors on them, and had biker jackets, which didn't say tough to me, but
Didn't
whatever.
they usually
Um,
wear trench coats? Wasn't trench coats a mod thing? Like those
it
gray
might have
trench
been.
coats? Or
It
is that
might have been.
the later, or is that a new wave thing? I don't
That
know.
might
It's
have
all,
been. I think that was more of a new wave. They wore
yeah,
trench
okay.
coats, not even black trench coats. They wore like brown trench coats. But
Yeah.
yeah, they all wore like motorcycle jackets and then rode scooters with a bunch of mirrors on them, which again doesn't sound tough to me, but they were apparently toughies, in England at the
I
time.
mean, you get enough of
Yeah,
anybody in a big pack and they get pretty threatening.
right.
Mhm.
And so they got really big in the mid '60s.
Sounds
And
about right.
some of their huge bangers are like My Generation, which I didn't know. I thought he was just stuttering when he does that, talking about my
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
generation. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was supposed to replicate somebody on amphetamines, like one of the.
That's a good surprise, actually. I didn't
Yeah,
think
that
of putting
was a really good
surprise, but
surprise.
I watched the Smothers Brothers performance that they did.
Uh,
Did you see that?
yes,
Where
yeah.
Keith Moon asked one of the
Oh
techs to
yeah,
put
yeah, yeah.
explosive
To
device
explosives, yeah,
in his drum, and the guy put in 10 times as much explosive powder as he said he was going to. So it actually blew up, and like
yeah,
everybody's ears are ringing. And
yeah. Right.
yeah, but when he's doing the performance, he's like, "Why don't you just fade
Right
away?"
away, yeah,
I didn't realize. I had no
yeah.
idea that was a nod to mods doing amphetamines.
They would have gotten it at the time, I guess.
Living in New Mexico, I feel like we've been around lots of people who are on methamphetamines. I never listened to them stutter.
Well, normally they're just jabbering about something that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly.
what? Yeah.
Or
So anyway,
hollering at me when I go past the Pickwick.
yeah, yeah, right. So lots of great songs, and then I think so in 1960, I believe it's 68. Pete Townsend, who wrote most of their music, that I didn't realize this. He was their songwriter. Was Pete Townsend. He started feeling sort of, well, he was getting depressed because he felt like they were on the verge of kind of being forgotten. like their time had
Uh-huh.
passed, and he wanted to stay relevant. Just hitting these singles, he thought, yeah, we need to do something else. He came up with his concept. Actually, he proposed the concept for a rock opera. He was like, "Well, that sounds interesting," and so he wrote this story based on the teachings of an Indian religious leader. He didn't come up with the concept of rock opera, but it suggested to him, and he was like, "Okay." So he writes a story.
But the Who comes up with it. It's their concept. I mean, it's the other guy
Well,
that's not in the band
yeah.
talking
Well, it's like
about
it's
it.
a producer. It's a producer
Yeah.
says,
But
why,
this is
why
the
don't you?
first. This is the first rock
No,
opera,
this is
right?
the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
But what
Right.
I'm saying is that the idea was given was, he says, "Hey, why don't you think about doing this, something like this?" And I think it was sort of a statement of the concept album because he had the Beach Boys and then he had Sergeant Pepper, in '67. And so he decides to do this about '68. So that would kind of fit in, when he decided to, oh, we're going to kind of do a concept album. But they're taking the concept a little bit further into an actual opera. Concept
Well,
album, things are sort of loosely tied together, but he's like making a story and then putting it into music and telling the story through the next, hour and a half or whatever.
one of the things
Um,
I thought was interesting is it was so they were trying to come up with this idea of doing a rock opera, but it was actually in the albums before they were sort of fumbling towards this
mhm.
idea. And
Yeah.
there's a song that Wes Anderson used in can't remember if it's Rushmore or what, but it's called A Quick One While He's Away.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one. That's the first
Yes.
time I tried,
Yeah.
and it's very similar to what the Beatles do at the end of Abbey Road, where they do like a long sort of medley
Yeah.
of
It-
loosely
yeah.
connected
It's like a
pretty song.
menagerie. It's kind of like all these
Yeah,
things
yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like
exactly. Yeah.
flowing together. Yeah. So,
Let
um,
me play this. Let me play the beginning of this one and see if I can like think of what it was. All night on the year. You hear that? He was you home yesterday. Yeah, I know this. Yeah. But he ain't here. Her man's been gone all night on the year. Yeah, I definitely know. Yeah, it's on the Rushmore soundtrack, so I definitely know that song.
yeah. Yeah.
That one, it goes on
It's
for
a
a long time,
banger.
and it
Yeah.
changes the part about Ira, the engine
Yeah.
driver,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
mumble through it. It's very much like, but that makes it that's like 67.
Right.
That makes it
Right.
before the other. Although Sergeant Pepper's is 67 also, right?
67. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so this one and Abbey Road are the same year,
So,
contemporary.
yeah. So what are
So
we drinking?
so we had a long conversation about what to do. I considered brandy because I heard a lot about Keith Moon drinking it, and then as I read about the history of the band, I realized that would maybe be in poor taste because
Yeah. That's
he did
pretty
not,
dark.
he did not he had an untoward ending, so we decided
Yes.
not to go with that. And you suggested something we found on the internet that was way too complicated and involved tapioca cubes. And I looked up just because Tom Collins, because of Tommy. That's a pretty good drink. I started drinking it a little bit ago. I wish I had a little bit more ice, but otherwise I'm actually
Yeah.
enjoying
Me
it.
too. I'm actually having my eyes too. It's a super easy drink and not ordered often enough. Basically, think of it this way: it's a gin and almost like a 7 Up. It's lemon juice, sugar, and carbonated water, and then gin
Mhm.
mixed in ice. So I mean, if you order this in a bar, in a traditional bar, not like a craft cocktail bar, but if you order this in a bar, what they're
Mhm.
going to do is they're going to put in an ounce and a half of gin, put ice cubes in it, and then they're going to fill it up with either sweet and sour or Sprite, or they'll do half sweet and sour, top it with Sprite for the carbonation, and then they're going to garnish it with one of those Dayglow maraschino cherries.
What is sweet and sour?
It's just like it says. It's like basically lemon juice and
Lemon juice
sugar
and simple
water.
syrup,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Oh,
that's all
okay.
it is.
All right.
Yep. If you order this in a craft cocktail bar, they'll actually probably take the time to do lemon juice by itself, simple syrup by itself, and carbonated water by itself, and it's much more effervescent if you do it that way. So it's almost like a real one is like maybe a rung lower than champagne, and it should be that carbonated.
I
A nice refreshing drink.
carried my soda water home or my club soda home from the
Like
grocery store. Cheers, but yeah, cheers.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah.
cheers.
I was showing you how flat this is because I carried it home in my
Yeah,
back pocket and then opened it and sprayed club soda all over the kitchen.
yeah.
I don't know how many bubbles are left in this thing at this point, which is unfortunate because I think that would really add something to the
You need to
drink.
invest in a soda stream. It's actually for drunkards. It's
We had
actually a
it.
great
We had
investment.
it. We had it.
Yeah,
No one used it. It was just sort of gathering dust, and so
yeah.
eventually
Well,
we got rid of it. But yeah,
for these kind of drinks, it actually comes in really handy. So plot. Let's talk about plot of Tommy. So
let's talk about
Tommy
the plot of
is
Tommy. Yeah.
Why don't you give us a plot? I've been talking enough.
Tommy starts with it actually starts with the birth of the eponymous Tommy, sometime I think before the First World War.
Mhm.
And then his father goes off to the war, disappears in the war. His mother, I don't know if she remarries, but she finds another fella. Then the dad comes back from the war. Turns out he wasn't dead, murders the new guy.
Mhm.
Tommy sees it and goes into a state of catatonia and becomes deaf, dumb, and blind permanently, essentially.
Right.
The story entails his parents trying to get him out of that and getting him a doctor, which I thought was kind of funny that there's a quack healer
Yeah.
in this opera, and yet the guy was apparently influenced by some quack Indian healer.
Right.
I
Right.
sort of think of that as being
Yeah.
the same thing, but I don't know. Maybe
Sure.
I'm crazy.
Yeah.
His mother figures out through the help of some doctors how to get him out of his state of catatonia, and he snaps out of it and becomes a sort of cult leader. And then the
Yes.
cult rejects him, and I think that's pretty much the story of what happens. And
That's sort of the story. The part that everybody will know is that for some reason, Tommy was really good at playing pinball. He's in this catatonic state for his entire life. He wouldn't say anything, couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. But for some reason, he could play a mean pinball. And
Mhm.
so he became the pinball wizard. And then that's how he got his following, as everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is the best, this deaf, dumb, and blind kid, as they call him.
I wanted to make a statement about the Pinball Wizard. The
Yeah.
song's called Pinball Wizard, right? And
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
say he's a pinball wizard, blah blah blah, right? But
Yeah.
in the movie, there's a part, the guy who's talking in the song, the narrator of the song, is a really great pinball player who haunts all the different amusement parks in Brighton and Southampton and Soho, right? All over
Sure.
England. And I got the impression that that the pinball wizard is the one narrating the song. I always thought it was Tommy. So I had kind of a thing about I was like, which is it? But then in the film, there's definitely a character cast as the pinball wizard who is not Tommy.
Right. Well,
So
I think Tommy becomes a pinball wizard because in the song he says, I used to be the pinball king, but I just gave my crown to him.
yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that's that to me
Good.
it doesn't quite mash up anyway because there's a song in there called 1921, and supposedly that's when the dad comes back. So Tommy would have been like 3 years old at the time. When were pinball machines invented? In the 50s?
They go way back, actually.
Do they? Okay.
They got really popular in the 1950s. In fact, in New York, LaGuardia had this obsession with pinball machines
Uh-huh.
and closed down all the pinball parlors. And there's still a place apparently out here in the river where there's hundreds or thousands of pinball machines that were dropped into the river. But I think they go back pretty far.
Well,
I
so
think there might have been pinball machines
I'm
in the
reading here that
20s.
the first proper pinball machines with flippers and bumpers and all the rest of it is 1947.
But I think they existed before that. I think it's the
He
ones
would
with
have
the
been about
flashing.
44 years old when that
No,
came
but
out.
it definitely says can't hear no whistles and bells. So it's definitely like a
Yeah.
modern pinball machine. So he
But
would have been.
yeah. So he can feel the vibrations from the bumpers and all this other stuff. And he plays a clean game. He doesn't try to tilt it. Yeah, it's not supposed to add up.
If he's born before, yeah,
I'm just
he's
throwing it
born at
out
the
there.
latest. Must have been born before his dad went to World War One. So at the latest, he'd have to be 30 something by the time of
I guess.
1946.
Yeah.
Maybe Pete Townsend wasn't a big historical researcher.
Well, he only wrote that song, which is their most famous song. So he only wrote that song because the editor or the columnist, I think, for the New York Times was a huge pinball fan. And so he figured that if he had this song on the album, he'd get a good review from this particular journalist. Now think of the planning. Now you think of a song as just thrown together. Oh no.
Yeah.
No, not with an artiste. An
Yeah.
artiste thinks about it and says, who's my audience? Who's going to
Mhm.
listen to this song? How can I get them to like this album and write a good review of this album? Because this guy writes for the New York Times or whatever it was. At the time, people still read. By the way, I just read a fact that only 48% of American voters did not read a book in 2023.
It's really interesting that you say that about him being so smart and kind of manipulative about that, because
Uh-huh.
there's another story, When they got their first recording contract, he knew the guy they were meeting with had represented and recorded the Kinks. So he
Okay.
specifically wrote a song in the style of the Kinks to
Sound
play
like
for
the
the first
Kinks.
song.
Yeah.
And
That's pretty smart.
that's how they got the recording contract.
That's pretty
So I'm thinking,
clever.
this guy's a good songwriter, and he's got the brains to actually do things like
Yeah.
that kind of impresses me. Somebody in the guy's family history managed to reproduce while having a face that looks like a turkey dog. So
Jeez.
it must have
Well,
something
well,
going on.
apparently, I guess he was going to be a journalist. Writing was his thing.
Oh,
Music
okay.
wasn't his first call. So he went to school to be a writer, and journalism was sort of going to be a thing. And if you look at his history, like he's written book reviews and he's written journal articles and magazine articles. I mean, he's a writer, you know,
Yeah.
and
I think that the line in Pinball Wizard where it says such a supple
supple
wrist.
supple
Every
wrist.
time I hear that song, that makes me laugh. I'm like, that is
Yeah,
a brilliant line. I don't know why
yeah.
I love that line so
Well, it's kind
much.
of like it's kind of like Jesse's Girl, where he's like the point is moot.
That line sounds like somebody that like learned the word moot. That's like the band Five for Fighting, and they
Yeah.
keep using the word naive, and I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
you learned the word naive, and I actually don't think you understood what the word means. Like
Yeah. Well,
you're
I
not
guess
using it right.
could we say that about isn't it ironic? Where she learned the word
Oh my
ironic, but
God. Oh
she didn't learn the definition of it. She just learned the
yeah.
word. I think it just comes down to rhyming. Like what rhymes with lemon, or what rhymes with banana. There's some dark stuff in Tommy. That's the thing about it. It's like
There's
it's
a
not
song called
all
Fiddle Around, I think it's
fiddle
called.
around. Well, there's cousin Kevin. Is that cousin? Yeah,
Cousin something like that. Yeah,
cousin
something.
Kevin,
Yeah,
and then
cousin Kevin.
Uncle
Yeah.
Ernie, and fiddle around.
And he gets
So
tortured by his cousin. He gets
he's
molested
tortured
by
by
his
his
uncle.
and
And
like really tortured. He talks about he's going to tie him to a chair. Maybe he'll put a cigarette out on his arm.
yeah, yeah,
And because he's not going to scream or anything. And there's
right.
so much I can do with a freak, is what the guy says. I mean, what a terrible line. All I can see is that kid that lives next door to Toy Story, and then his uncle. So the mom needs a babysitter, so leaves him with his uncle, who's
Hmm.
apparently had a few drinks and likes to molest children. Yeah. And so like
I couldn't
the
imagine
first line of that song is like, was it down go the bedclothes, up comes
something
a
like that.
nightshirt.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
terrible.
I can't
You
imagine having to sing that song and they're having to sing it like I don't know, it's
Well,
really
they made
yeah.
Entwistle do it. They made the bassist do it. The bassist sings no other song.
Actually, I think Entwistle wrote the only I think he wrote two songs and one of the ones he wrote was Cousin Kevin, I think, if I remember right.
But
Entwistle
they made him do
made
the
him
fiddle
sing that.
around, I think.
I was on a
So,
road trip with one of my friends who's a big classic rock guy. And for some reason we were talking about classic rock and he played some The Who. As a memory game, he had me memorize the names of the guys in the Who. So for
uh,
years and years I knew these names. I didn't know who they were at all. And then
yeah.
one day I heard John Entwistle died on the radio and I was like, "Oh, that's the bass player from the Who." And I remember thinking, I'm glad I
Oh,
memorized that on that
yeah.
car trip.
So let's see. What else did I hear? I've heard "I'm Free," which is played quite a bit. Let's
See, but I
see.
thought like John Entwistle wrote two songs. I think Keith Moon made a suggestion for a song that got him writing credit, but basically this
Yeah,
was just like Pete Townsend's thing.
It's
It's
Townsend's
kind
whole thing.
it's kind of impressive to me that everybody was like, you know what, we do need to do a new thing. Pete, just do your thing.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
just
yeah,
run with it, write it, we'll go along with it. And everybody
yeah.
was 100%.
I
I
think
think they
I
got a
think
little bit annoyed with the Sergeant Pepper style re-recording and sort of
yeah,
overproducing of the album, is what it
right.
sounded like. But basically, everybody was like, "Yeah, just take the ball and run.
Yeah.
Like we need a touchdown. So
Well, and I
go."
didn't realize that Townsend was the lead singer on a lot of these songs too. Yeah.
Well, he
So,
was a solo. He was a solo artist. He did that one song that everybody knows. That's like
but that was
that's
after
years
the
later. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, years later. But I mean, during this, so he's lead vocals. Townsend is "It's a Boy," 1921, first really two songs.
I didn't
Um,
understand why nobody in 2021 sang that song. Got a feeling 21 is going to be a good
a
year.
good year, yeah.
Maybe it's just too obscure, but
Well, I was thinking about that because some of these songs are just rocking along, and then all of a sudden he takes a break to divert to something. So like,
right,
I got a
a 10
feeling
minute underture.
21's gonna be a good
Yeah,
year.
that's a good melody. I like it.
What about the boy? He saw everything. And then got a feeling 21's gonna, and you get into
Gonna
that
be a
part,
good
like got a
year.
feeling
Yeah,
21's gonna be a good year,
yeah,
and like all that.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden they divert to this to
There's some of the problems of like I hate to say it, but like kind of a weak musical going on here.
yes, yeah,
There's some speeding up the lyrics
yes,
to match
yes,
the lines, like to get all these
right,
words
yeah,
in, to get a bunch of exposition
yeah,
in.
yeah,
And
yeah,
even then, people complain that they didn't explain what was going on enough. Like if you're
yeah.
listening to it, you're like, what's going on? What the
Yeah,
part that
right,
happens,
right.
the
Well,
part
what
that
they
happens
needed,
that traumatizes him.
they needed a Gilligan's Island intro. You know, this
Yeah.
is what happened. you know.
Oh, I thought you meant sit right back. We'll tell the
Well,
tale.
exactly, a tale of a poor dumb deaf blind
Family
kid.
deaf dumb blind boy.
I think we just wrote their new intro. Also, something else that I just kept hearing
A three-hour rock opera.
yeah, right, yeah. In 1921, so there's the part. What about the boy? He didn't know. He saw nothing or something like that. And then there's the background is supposed to be Tommy saying, "I saw everything," except he says, "I saw everything." And
I
I'm
saw.
like, what is it with English people? Why can't they say saw or
Oh,
draw? Why do you have to say
yeah.
SAR? And I'm going to go
I,
draw over here. I'm going to go
you
draw
hear
on the tip.
people. You actually hear people in New York do that sometimes. Like it's rare
Oh,
today.
that's so
The,
annoying.
the same people who drop R's on words that
Right?
have R's will also
Add
add
them
R's
to
to words like idea. Like
idea.
my stepdad would always say idea. I had this great idea. He would say that. And I'd be like, wait a minute, you can't say the R in car, but you added
Right,
like you
right,
took the R off
right,
car and held onto it for later and then
right, right,
attached
right,
it to
right.
idea later in the
I
context.
just
It's a thing about England is that when you go to school, the more years you spend in school, the more you sound like this particular accent from rich
yes,
people from London. We
yes.
don't do that in America. We don't try to get, I mean, you do it just by being influenced a little bit, you lose your accent, but we don't
Well, to be
consciously
fair,
try to lose our accents. Like we
to
don't,
be
people from the
fair,
South don't try to talk.
in England, when you're in like sixth grade, you test into either vocational school or arts or
Yeah.
like or academic
Oh man,
school.
that would have
And
screwed me over.
but what's funny is all of these guys tested into the academic. They didn't
Uh-huh.
test into vocational. The Beatles all tested, if I remember correctly, into vocational.
Well, the Beatles
And
were actually, it's weird because I don't think people think of it this way, but the divide between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles is that the Rolling Stones are a bunch of college guys. They
yes,
got them, they went and
yeah,
recruited them from universities, whereas the Beatles were like blue collar dudes.
total working class. Yeah, total working
Yeah.
class from like.
From London, by the way, from
And
way
I
out in
think I think we'd probably have the same thing in the U.S. if once kids got to the sixth grade. And I'm an advocate for this, by the way. I'm totally for socialized education, but we got to do it this way, which is you get to sixth grade and you're either going to go become an electrician or you can become a philosopher, but you got to test and figure out which one you're going to go. And the
I
parents,
just
if they
really
want,
think I really think that would have screwed me over. I was like ADD and just not doing well in school. I
I'm
think
sure, I'm sure you
probably
would be
still would
fine.
have. I still would have tested above national standards for how
I'm
dumb.
sure you would have been fine. That's sort of wise because you got a working class, blue collar kind of school, and then you got this as they get more educated in the academic side.
So definitely listening to this. So this is a double album, which to me is something like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. It's
Mhm.
intended. You're supposed to sit down and just listen to the whole thing.
Right.
And that one I think produced a couple of singles, but you kind of don't expect there to be a lot of singles necessarily off of that
Yeah.
kind of. I guess with the Beatles, I mean, the White Album's boring.
Melancholy, it wasn't meant to be conceptual. I mean,
A little bit.
Hank,
I think it was a
yeah,
little bit. I
Cor
worked at
yeah,
Tower Records when that one was out, and I used to
uh,
put it on, and it would go on for like 2 hours, and it was a great album. And people would walk up
yeah.
and buy it just from listening to it. That's how
Well,
good
it
it
was.
was.
I own the album. Yeah, it was a great album. And I just saw him this past weekend. In fact,
Did you see what The Who's only big single in America was? Like the only top
yes,
single they had was
yeah,
"I Can See for Miles."
yes.
I don't even. Is that even good? There's a
That's
lot
a
of
good
other
tune.
songs.
No, that's a great
Okay.
song. But like, I mean, are you kidding me? Like, who are you? And
Yeah.
Teenage Wasteland, isn't Teenage Wasteland part of?
Teenage Wasteland is on Bob O'Reilly. It's a line from Bob O'Reilly, if I remember right, which is like, "It's only Teenage
Teenage
Wasteland."
Wasteland.
I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's
That's
actually the
Baba.
title of the song.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Baba Raleigh. Yeah, that's a great song.
But it's also a very artsy song. Like it has a really long closeout with a bunch of
Yeah,
gypsy music for a
yeah,
couple of minutes,
yeah.
and which is cool, but that's not what you don't want to hear that when you're down at the levee with your Chevy drinking whiskey and rye. You need
Right.
something at 3 minutes and 25 seconds and has a beat. But yeah, this is something that would have been fun to go see. I don't know if I would have enjoyed it. It's kind of I don't know. Can't decide about
I think it
seeing
was,
it.
if it was just a band like doing it and not like an opera, which is what I saw, which is
Yeah.
terrible.
Well, it would have been
Um,
cooler in 1970, right? Or did you hear that? I didn't realize they were at Woodstock. They played this at Woodstock.
yes. Did they
That
play this at Woodstock?
they played this. They played Tommy at Woodstock, and they
Woodstock.
said that first of all, when they started playing, Abby Hoffman came up and tried to give some
Yeah,
political speech.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I think it was Daltrey. I don't remember who. One of them kicked him off the stage and was like, "Get off my effing stage." And
Yeah.
then they played Tommy, and right at the part where it's like, I can't remember the exact wording of the song, but right as they played sort of the climactic moment, the sun came up above the trees and everybody like went nuts. Like it sounded like one of the great
Oh yeah,
moments,
yeah,
but
yeah.
then
Yeah,
also must have been about 5:30 in the morning. So I don't know if
it was
they're
see
singing.
me, touch me, feel me, heal me. Or something. No, see me, feel me, touch me, heal me.
I'm
So
not sure you nailed it, but it's something like that.
all right, so this is something I just read the other day. So I'm gonna bring it up just because it's sort of relevant.
Okay.
At Woodstock, 1969, try to guess who got paid the most out of the
Among
lineup.
this, oh, of all the bands that were
Yeah,
there,
nope, you're
it's
wrong.
not a
You're
cool
wrong.
artist.
No,
It
you're
is?
wrong.
Okay, all right. Tell
It's
me who it was. I don't remember.
Jimi Hendrix was number one. He got
Oh,
paid.
yeah.
He got paid 18 grand for
Wait a minute. Wait
Woodstock.
a minute. You're telling me the black guy got paid more than everybody else for the
Can you
first
believe
time in
that in
history? That's wow.
1969?
That's
What?
actually,
What?
I guess they really were
So
progressives there.
so that's 18,000. So that comes out to 143 grand for one night's performance. That's pretty stout.
Yeah.
What you're thinking of is the next one, Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Yes. Yeah.
Got 15 grand, which is
Yeah.
120,000
There's even
today.
somebody else. There's another one on
Joan
that.
Baez was the third in
Joan
line.
Baez is in the 60s. Joan Baez is cool. That's
She got 10
longer.
grand. After
Yeah.
that was CCR.
CCR is the one I was thinking of. CCR was
They got 10 grand, but CCR is pretty. I mean, they're at the
No,
time they're
no, no, no.
totally
That's a really
relevant,
cool
man.
band. That's a really cool band. But I was listening to a podcast about them one time, and I was surprised how they didn't last very long. They got into
Mm.
like these big contracts. They basically had like two albums,
Yeah,
and the band like spun apart, and Fogerty ended up on his own. And
yeah. And then he
I
got
didn't
sued
realize
for sounding
they
like
had
himself.
such a small output of music as CCR, which is kind of funny because I know a
Right, it's
bunch of
just
others.
too
So let me ask you this. This is something I always think of. I was thinking this when I was at the Louvre. I was walking
at
around and I
the
was like
at the Lou.
at the Louvre. Louvre.
Oh, Paris now. Okay.
Le Musée. So I was walking around and I'm looking and I'm like, it's unbelievable that they get all these artists all in one place.
Mhm.
And I started to think about it and I was like, wait, or is it that what paintings end up on the wall at the Louvre end up being the ones that everybody thinks are the amazing
Yeah.
paintings,
See, that's
right?
a good
And I was
question.
thinking that
Yeah.
about, I'm looking at the lineup at Woodstock and I'm like, how were all those bands in one? And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you sure they didn't become all those bands because they were the
Right.
people that played at Woodstock? Like they became the emblem of the 60s and
Right. Maybe.
you've got the Who, you've got Jimi Hendrix, Joan Baez, Janis Joplin, all these people all in one place at one
Well, let me
time.
let me let me break it down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 10th highest paid was the Who in
Yeah.
1969 at Woodstock. They got $6,250, 6,250,
I got the
which comes
impression the Who, I don't think made a lot of money because they were talking about as late as like the early 70s, the fact that they smashed their drums and smashed their guitars was a financial problem for them. I could tell
right.
you in 1969, that was not a financial problem for the Beatles. The Beatles
You're
could have
right.
set 20 guitars on fire every day and it put a dent in
Right,
how much
right.
money they were making.
Yeah, but I think
So
the Beatles had so many number one hits. I don't think the Who had any number one hits.
no, they had a
Bangers, they had
number
like top
two.
fives, but
I think they had a number two album that only one top 10
in
hit
America,
in
yeah.
the United States of America. And
But like
that's, yeah,
like the Beatles were just they were so I mean they were just knee deep in money because they
yeah.
were just so popular.
I think the Who was
Um,
kind of a working band. I mean, they had to go tour and make money. They had to actually show up.
that's
And
pretty much all they did. Yeah, it was tour. They toured all the time. They toured locally. They toured,
if you get paid $6,000 to be at Woodstock and you set on fire a, $1,000 set of drums and guitar, that's
well,
going
not
to
only
cut it.
that, well, not only that, but you get a bill for $40,000 for destroying your hotel room for a $6,000 gig. That's
Yeah.
not a lot of, and that's what they would do. Like, so Keith Moon, we haven't even talked about this. Keith Moon, their drummer, was the epitome of excess and craziness
Yeah.
for a band
Yeah.
member. The guy apparently found out that you can buy cherry bombs legally in Alabama, like M80s, like a tiny little stick of dynamite in Alabama when they're on their American tour. And so,
USA.
yeah,
USA.
USA, right? No, just America. This is the hashtag America,
America.
or
Yeah.
there's no,
Hashtag
yeah,
America.
America. he decided that what he should do is start flushing them down the toilet, lighting and flushing down the toilet at hotels. And so it would blow up the plumbing. So it was between that and just, I think there was a hotel in like Canada where they shoved a marble table through the wall. I mean, they would just destroy where they were living. I think if I remember correctly, he drove a car into a hotel pool, total excess. And so they'd play a gig. And Daltrey's talked about this in interviews. Like they'd play a gig and get like $20,000 for the gig and get a $30,000 bill because it was Moon and Entwistle that would just go nuts. Daltrey never did the hard drugs, never did anything like that. He would just like go to sleep and next thing you know. But this album made them millionaires. I don't know if you read that part.
No.
So this album sold.
This was a big part of why they actually could survive as a band. I know that.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the first 2 weeks, this album made $200,000 in sales, or I'm sorry, sold 200,000 albums in the first like 2 weeks, and within a year they were all multimillionaires because of this album. It was kind of funny. The little notes on the history is that allowed Daltrey and Townsend. Was it Townsend or Entwistle?
No,
there were like two of them that
Townsend and Daltrey were able to live comfortably.
Yes, yeah, and the other two just blew their money, just like spending on all kinds of crap.
Yeah.
I think Moon bought he bought like a Rolls Royce and painted it pink. I mean, just all kinds of crazy stuff.
Very punk rock. I think it's very punk rock.
He was very punk. He was ahead of his time.
There's always a couple of guys. There's always a couple of guys like that in a band, and there's always, if a band's successful, there's got to be a guy like Daltrey and Townsend to sort of keep it real. I mean, even we read about the story of U2, and one of the guys is like a drug addict and a maniac. Everybody else is kind of chill, and one's the artist,
keeping him cool. Yeah.
One keeps him cool. I don't know. There's, and if they're successful, and it's weird because I don't really think the Beatles were like that. There is no maniac on the Beatles. They were all pretty even keeled. They all got a little bit into drugs because they were young dudes.
Lennon was the loose.
Lennon is the Townsend, right?
Yeah.
But Lennon is the Townsend. He's the artist. He's the annoying.
No, I don't think so. I think McCartney's more of the Townsend. I think
that's true. I was thinking about that the other day because I was thinking about, they said Oasis was getting back together.
Oh yeah, we're bigger than the Beatles.
One of those guys said they're bigger than the Beatles. I'm like, I can name 4 songs by Oasis.
Right.
You guys are in my wheelhouse age wise. Like,
I think he was being ironic because.
Oh well, I hope so
because Lennon said we're bigger than Jesus.
Yes, yeah.
And then Oasis said we're bigger than the Beatles.
Thinking to myself, okay, rock opera. People thought of rock opera.
Okay.
Anybody ever think of doing that with rap and with hip hop? And I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, that would be called a hip hopera, wouldn't it be? And I looked it up. I googled it. And, like, sure enough, Beyonce did a hip hopera.
Oh, geez, that's terrible.
It sounded terrible. And I think it was a flop, and it was not.
Well, you know what I just thought of? Hamilton. Is that not a hip hopper?
Yeah, definitely.
And that was successful as could be, right?
Yeah, well, it's terrific. I mean, that's like the first time that hip hop sort of comes to the stage, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's probably a million other things, but in terms of a big Broadway smash, and that's a bigger hit than Tommy ever was. I would say.
I think so. So what's the most recent rock opera you can think of?
It would have to be somebody. I mean, there's a bunch of these jukebox musicals, obviously, right? Billy Joel and Elton John, and ABBA, and I saw Jersey Boys. But in terms of actually,
no, like none of those, like made by the artists, to be a rock opera. Well, I'll tell you mine, and this is a little question, obviously, because I have one chambered. But Green Day, American Idiot.
You think?
That album came out in 2000. So that came out in 2004. The tour that the Green Day is doing, the Saviors Tour, the point of it is it's the 30th anniversary of Dookie. So what they do is they play the entire album back to back of Dookie. It's just one after the other. And then once they get done, it's the 20th anniversary of American Idiot, which was made as a protest in response to
the Iraq War, pretty much.
Yeah, the Iraq War. And then they do that back to back to back. That one, I never realized it, like how much of an opera it really was. Because I never really heard the album. I'd heard a lot of the songs. I Don't Want to Be an American Idiot and all this other stuff. But when you hear it back to back, it really is. And I just looked it up just to make sure. And it's called a punk rock opera is how it's labeled
Okay.
by
It's kind of just a
by the
concept
media.
album, right? It's not really a.
No, because it has this. It's the story of a kid who goes
Well,
off to war, comes
I'm trying
back.
to I'm trying to think what is on. I'm trying to remember what songs are on that album because I feel like that song just has some that album, sorry, just has some like bangers, right? It just has
Yeah,
a bunch of I mean Boulevard of Broken Dreams, right?
right.
Got
Hmm.
Wake Me Up When September Ends. No, not that many. Not as many big songs as I thought it might have. It's got one or two, but okay,
So it's
maybe.
got American Idiot, first one.
I knew Dookie backwards and forwards. I didn't
Yeah.
really, I never bought American Idiot.
Hmm.
I was a little put off by the protest aspect of that album, I have to say. But
I get it. I get it. But if you look at the whole track list, it really is. It's a story. So it's front to back. It tells a story of a kid
yeah, that makes
who's
sense.
so America was changed. He goes off to war, all the stuff that's happening, and then he comes back and everything's changed and so forth. So matter of fact, they made a musical about it. It's kind of interesting that it's the only connection I'm drawing is like you've got Tommy in 1969 and
Uh-huh.
then American Idiot in 2004. So I mean, it was
Yeah.
certainly influential, I think.
Yeah, oh, I definitely think it's influential. I had an idea for, I think we're getting towards sort of where we should do the biggest surprise, but I had an idea for a new bit we could do, which
Okay.
is the connection to a previous show we've done.
Okay.
Like, I think that comes up all the time when I'm doing the research. I'm like, oh, I didn't
Yeah.
realize it.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
relates because I was
Okay.
thinking The Who has a song called Magic Bus,
Kinsey. Yeah.
which is clearly drawing on Kesey, right? I just
Yeah.
thought that was
Casey. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I
Kinsey.
just put a
Yeah.
little note. I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
and then I
Yeah.
want to do one of those
Magic
Charlie from It's
bus.
Always Sunny in Philadelphia boards with like cards from all the shows
Yeah.
we've done
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
yarn connecting
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
how they're related
Right.
to each other. What was your biggest surprise from listening to this?
I guess I had a few. I think my biggest surprise was that this was Townsend's project. I didn't
Okay.
realize that Townsend was such a
He's like the Brian Wilson of this project, right? Like
yes,
this
yes.
is
Yeah.
like him
Well,
doing it.
of the band, he wrote most of their
Well,
songs.
I think there's more parody and talent in the Who than there is in the Beach Boys. In the sorry, yeah, in the Beach
Well, that's
Boys.
true. Yeah, that's very true.
But
Yeah,
on this album,
yeah,
I think Pete Townsend is the
yeah,
Brian Wilson of this one. Like
yeah.
definitely.
No, that's definitely a good point. So that was probably my biggest.
That's pretty good. I like that. Like that this
I
one
don't
had
know.
sort of an auteur that did the whole thing. I like that.
Yeah, I think so. Rather
My
than
my my biggest surprise started with when I realized that this was 1969. I think I thought of the Who as being a phenomenon of the 70s and being
yes,
a much later thing like the kids on that 70s show would listen to the Who and like go do acid and watch a
right.
show by them at the Laser Symphony or something.
Yes.
But so and then when I started thinking about it, is I was like those years of the late 60s and
Hmm.
especially in Britain, right?
Hmm.
You've I mean, everybody knows we've got the Beatles and we've got the Stones, right? But
Yeah.
we've also got the Who. We've also got Led Zeppelin is
Yes.
like 2 years behind these other bands. You've got all of this stuff happening at the same time in the same
Right.
place. And
Yeah.
then not only does it all happen in the same time in the same place, but like you were talking about it too. This is punk rock.
Yeah.
That the Who smashing their guitar
Right.
accidentally, by the way, the first time he did it, he accidentally broke the guitar
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
crowd went wild. So he ran with it
He
and it
just
became
did it
this
again. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
became this big thing in rock and roll. And it's
Right.
like, this is like where rock and roll really kind of happened, like all in that moment. These, what we think of as rock, like as white guys, is the late 60s, these British bands. That's really
Yeah.
it's really what we're talking about when we talk about it. And that really struck me. Like, I was thinking about Marty McFly in Back to the Future
Yeah.
when he does the whole he's like laying on the ground and like jamming that nobody who knew the Who would have been confused by that. And
Right.
that's 10
Right.
years. Marty McFly is 1955. He's doing Chuck Berry, which everybody in America understands, and it transitioned into this crazy British proto-punk thing in
Yeah.
10 years.
Right.
And I just think that's fascinating. Like what was going on in that country and at that time? Like what there's some gigantic cultural phenomenon that fascinates me, and I can't
Yeah.
even begin to wrap my mind around.
It's called acid. It's called
Right,
acid. No, seriously.
but we had acid. But we had acid in
No,
America.
no, no,
What
no,
was
no,
it?
no, no,
Like
no,
something is
no.
different.
Acid, dude. We read the book on it.
That's
Acid
what I mean.
60,
That's what I mean.
65, 65. They start really getting into it, And then the music, everything else, listen to music in like 1963,
Hmm.
you know, and then listen to music in 1967.
Yeah, it's a huge
Four
difference.
years. And
Yeah.
it's like night and day. It's
Yeah.
like evolution just got put on
Well,
speed,
I don't
you
think it's an
know?
accident that the Who formed in 1964, right?
Mm,
That's a
mhm.
big time. That's a big change right there. I was thinking about the guitar smashing thing. I was thinking, wait, was the Who in the movie Blow Up? And I looked it up, and I was, because there's a scene where the characters run through a show and everybody's going crazy and stuff, and I realized no, it's the Yardbirds who are there
Mm.
smashing a guitar in the middle of Blow Up, and that's Jimmy Page,
Right,
his
right,
first.
right. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is all connected. This is like 4 years in London that were just, I mean, if I could go in a time machine and hang out somewhere for a couple of years,
Right.
I would go to London in 1963 and hang out till 1972, and just I don't think I'd ever be bored. I think you'd have an amazing time. But it's so anyway, that was my biggest surprise. Oh, and also there was a critique of I don't know if it was this band, but the Who, where they said
Mhm.
their shows are rock Nirvana.
Yes, yeah, I read
And
that
I was
too.
like, I don't
Yeah.
think that's an accident. I think Kurt Cobain knew about that.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
Probably heard that. Anyway, so it's not up to me. I think we're having kind of the same experience with this. I'm just going to leave it up to you to take your vote on whether you think we should toast this classic.
Well, how can I not? You know,
Okay. All right.
considering who it is. So yeah, absolutely. I'll
Well,
toast
give me your
this.
reasons. I mean, you sound like you kind of, I mean, you kind of like me.
Okay,
You kind of
so
like
well,
a bad
no, I
response to
mean,
the rock opera concept, right? Like,
between the legacy and how many
uh-huh.
people, these are the things that we always talk about. You know, influence, right?
Right.
What has it done for others that are sort of in the atmosphere and in the zeitgeist and so forth? And so they were a huge influence. I guess like this is one of those things where is it the creators or is it what they created? So if just doing Tommy, would I toast Tommy? And I guess the answer would be yes. There are parts of it, like the underture goes on forever.
Yeah,
Um,
it really does. It really.
it's a 10-minute long. It's
I
supposed to be
actually took
that
the opportunity to start reading the Wikipedia article about the Who and the album while that was playing,
while
which
that
is,
was going.
you
And
know,
that's supposed to be his trip
okay. Okay.
based on the Acid Queen or something
Can
like
I give you
that.
an argument in favor of Tommy as versus just the Who?
Sure.
Is that Tommy, like we said, sort of allowed the Who to continue existing, and
Yes.
a lot of the songs that we know from the Who are actually post Tommy, like
Yes.
Bob O'Reilly,
Well,
and I can't remember that album. I
yeah.
think is 72 or 73. Like they're done. They're gonna break up if
Mm.
this doesn't go the right way.
Yeah. No, that's
So,
certainly true. Yeah,
you
that's
know,
certainly true. Yeah, yeah. So, I'll definitely cheer. I think so. I mean, we looked at concept albums and we did Pet Sounds, right, as the
right,
first one. And we said, okay,
right,
the Beach Boys are definitely in there because of that. And then we said
yeah.
Sergeant Pepper's the next one. We said Radiohead, okay, Computer, next one. But so this is something different. This is taking the concept album, I guess, to its ultimate,
I
like
think so. Yeah,
to
I
its
think that's
ultimate,
fair to
right?
say. Yeah.
You
This
know,
is you're not even trying to have singles in the middle of
yeah,
this. You're just this is
right.
a concept. This
Yes,
is
correct. Right,
go
right,
home and
right.
listen to this and
Yeah,
just this is the story that I made up and
right. Well, that was my point, like 1921, where it was like
Mhm.
really good, and then they diverged back to okay, let's talk about the story. What about the
Right.
boy? He saw everything or whatever. Um,
He
and
soured everything.
he saw everything. It's like those people that say instead of sandwich, they say sandwich. I'm like,
I've
what?
never heard that. Who
Have
are
you ever
you
heard
hanging out with?
sandwich?
You say
S
sang?
S S-A-N-G wich. Sandwich instead of
I've never heard
sandwich.
that. I've
You
never
ever
heard that.
sandwich? Oh,
I don't know. I don't know what vault dwellers you're hanging out with, but that's wild.
Morlocks. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
Morlocks.
yeah, yeah.
But
Stay away from the Morlocks, Clint. I
yeah,
keep
right.
telling you that.
I know. Yeah, yeah. So I'm all about it. All right.
So
Well,
so
yeah,
you're toasting. You're going
I
for it.
am toasting.
And
Yeah.
I really have no objections to that. I came into this pretty skeptical. I'd say I was like a 4 out of 10 in terms of voting for it before it started. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but
Yeah.
I listened to it and I will say this. I was walking home from the doctor's appointment I took Cleo to,
Hmm?
and I had my headphones. I was thinking, oh, I should listen to the album one more time while I'm walking home. And I was like, I don't want to. I'm
Yeah.
gonna listen to I'm gonna listen to
Yeah.
Chapel Roan instead. I didn't love listening to it, but it's pretty important. I think it's a good album in that sense. It's an
Yeah.
important album.
Yeah.
This is my concurrence with your opinion, is all I'm saying.
Well,
So I think we'll go
yeah,
along with it.
I totally agree with it because I'm the exact same way. Like I have it on my downloads now, and I'm like, He comes on, I'm like, skip.
Yeah,
I'll listen to
exactly.
something
Yeah,
else. Yeah, skip.
yeah, exactly. Well, especially you don't want to listen to fiddle around any more times than you
Oh,
have to.
golly. I know.
So
I will say that, in music library, there's a lot of skipping going on between this album, George
things we've done for
Carlin.
the show.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Oh
George
yeah,
Carlin, Bill
yeah,
Cosby,
yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of stuff. I'm like, skip.
Hey,
Yeah,
Bill
I'm with
Cosby.
you.
We've had about 1,200 people listen to the Bill Cosby show. So
Holy
don't knock.
cow.
That's
Holy
our
cow.
that's our number one of all
Well,
time.
he's
So
still a great comedian. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yep.
back in the day,
So
Quaaludes and all.
I think our damage is done here for the day.
I think
So
so.
for Dave McArthur,
For Dr. Clint Lanier, I am signing off too.
peace out, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
That's it for episode 101 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, mix yourself up a soothing hot toddy for our discussion of the film Children of Men. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, and complaints, and forward those outlandish hotel bills to literally anyone else. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.